Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome to the 58th level of the RPG Cave. I'm one of your hosts, the level 99 human archmage, Ryan Turford, and I'm joined, as always, by the level 99 elf medic, Mr. Garret Bland. Garret, how are you doing this lovely, lovely Monday evening? I know it's not a holiday for y'all in the United States, but I hope you're doing okay nonetheless, good sir.
I didn't even know there was a holiday in Canada. It's so random. I now understand your perspective whenever we get like these random holidays as well. It's like, hey, we got a holiday off, and it's always mismatched. Why is it always like this, Brian? I wish we had just one holiday together so we could just hang out.
Well, I mean, I think we both have like the same holiday next month. I think they're called different things, but it's the same day, like the first week of September. So.
Yeah, it's like Labor Day weekend.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Memorial Day weekend.
I think for us it's called something different. I think it's like Memorial Day for us. But yeah, so that's
maybe we get the same thing. Yeah,
it's literally the same day. It's just called something different. But
oh, cool.
Yeah, just
not
I'm
totally
doing good,
man.
Up. But yeah, actually, the weird thing about Canada, Garret, as I go off on a tangent at least a little bit on this, is that almost the way that Canada has their holiday set up is that almost every single month has just one holiday weekend in it, or at least one holiday of some kind, and not every workplace kind of recognizes those particular holidays, but for the most part we usually get one once a month, whereas it sounds like California's like weird holidays are just all over the freaking place. So
they give you everything. It's like awesome. It's like, hey, here's this Chavez Day. I'm like, I didn't know this existed at all. I grew up somewhere in a different state, never knew this holiday existed, and they're like, no, it's been around for like years now. I'm like, okay, sounds good. I'll take a holiday off and recognize this. I'm good with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Play some games.
Yeah, well, I'm guessing you probably played some Xenoblade, maybe.
I've been playing some Xenoblade. I've been doing a lot of I have a lot of like other things to attend to, like work has been scrunching up on me. I've been doing a little bit of Xenoblade though. Probably like 3 or 4 hours.
Nice.
And it's good.
Nice. I'm sure you'll talk about all about it on Shack this week, so I won't distract you too much.
Yeah.
But enough about all that. Let's clear the dungeon of those pesky mobs so we can hit that raid boss. So, folks at home, if you want to support the show, there's a number of awesome ways to do that. Number one, if you're watching currently on the live stream on youtube.com/carpoolgaming, or if you're watching the video on demand after we have, stopped the show, feel free to like the video, subscribe to our channel, leave us a comment down below, telling us what you think about the future of Square Enix, and because we'd love to hear from you, or just tell us anything you want. If you want to, wish Garret, happy Xenoblade Chronicles 3 time, that's totally cool too. Yeah. Whatever you want, all that helps out the show. Also, we recently launched, as Lucklith reminds me in the chat with her moose emotes, we actually have the option to join the channel now. That's brand new to the channel, so you can subscribe for a certain dollar amount a month and you get access to certain emotes, or if you subscribe at the $15 level, you actually get a merch discount in addition to emotes. So if you're going to buy merch anyways, like the RPG Cave t-shirt over on our merch store, you want to maybe go over there, get that sweet discount, and then you could go order all your merch and it'll be much cheaper probably that way. So there you go. There's all that stuff. Also, if you're listening on audio feeds, don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, don't forget to rate us on your podcast service of choice. And then last but not least, if you want this show or some of our exclusive content a little bit early, head on over to Patreon, patreon.com/carpoolgaming. Throw a little tip in the old tip jar and out comes content, including a new episode, Sweet Hangs, that happened over the weekend with Donnie and Sean, where they talked about cars and Gears of War and stuff like that. It wasn't 4 hours of silence.
Red Hot Chili Peppers. Yeah. Like for like an hour. I loved it.
Exactly. So
it was good.
Head on over there to Patreon and go get all that stuff. But enough about all that, Garret. It's time to read from the sacred texts, because we wanted to have some fun with this week with the topic. So first off, we know that there have been rumors, kind of swirling that maybe Square Enix is going to be acquired by someone, maybe by Sony, maybe by someone else. Who knows? So what we wanted to do is we thought it would be fun number one, because it'd be fun just to sit down and just talk about, the future of Square Enix and where we think the company's going. Because, Square Enix, we talk about them a lot on this show about, their different games and stuff like that. But we never really talk about the company of Square Enix or really talk about the future of companies. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then we're going to play a what if scenario as to like, what if Sony bought Square Enix and what that would look like, and go from there. But yeah, we're not going to talk about existing rumors or anything like that. And there's no, console wars stuff here. That's not what Carpool Gaming's all about. We don't really discuss rumors themselves or do console war stuff on this channel. So we're just here to hang out and have a fun discussion. And apparently Sean feels like, he doesn't want Google to win here, but enough about all that. Let's talk about the implications of, first of all, what's happening here. So obviously we know that Square Enix recently sold their North American studios, including like all the IDOS studios like IDOS Montreal, as well as their additional properties like Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, and whatnot. So all their North American studios are totally gone. So a lot of people in the industry seem to think that this was pointing to the idea that Square Enix wants to be purchased at this point. We know, consolidation is becoming a big thing at the moment. A lot of companies are like a lot of smaller companies or medium-sized companies are trying to be gobbled up by larger companies at this point because they see the dollar signs from, the Activision deal or the Bethesda deal or a lot of the deals we've been seeing at this point. So Square Enix looks like they're trying to position themselves to be purchased, which again is the main reason we came up with this conversation. So we feel like they're pivoting in that way. So we want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits that come along with the idea of buying Square, because I know a lot of people, when they saw the rumors or read some of that stuff about Sony maybe potentially buying Square Enix, well, they asked the question, well, why even bother? In fact, we got the Muffin Mon here over on Discord who asked the question, what does Sony gain from buying Square Enix? The majority of their titles are already PS5 exclusive at this point, or primarily they sell better on PlayStation. Do you think they would make all of the games exclusive? The Switch is Square Enix's other big market for games with Triangle Strategy, Octopath, etc., and I think it would upset a lot of people. So yeah, I think
that's a good question.
There's more to Square Enix than just games, first of all. So obviously we know about the Square Enix games divisions. They've got, games of all ilks, from RPGs to other types of RPGs to maybe some, action games, but for the most part, it's mostly RPGs. That's kind of their thing. But what most people don't know about Square Enix, in addition to that, they are actually a quite prolific company in Japan, specifically when it comes to anime and manga, which are very, very popular in Japan. I know they're popular here too, but when a company like Sony or another Japanese company is maybe looking at, Square Enix as an acquisition target, that might be something. If they're looking to get into the world of anime and manga, Square Enix is actually like a very interesting company to look up. So for example, there's lots of big titles that have come out of Square Enix: Full Metal Alchemist, Soul Eater,
my favorite,
as well as modern titles like My Dress Up Darling and The Great Jal and The Misfit of Demon Academy. Like there's a lot of modern anime and manga that are quite popular in Japan and actually gaining ground in North American popularity as well, that have come out of Square Enix specifically and are published by Square Enix at this point. So I think there's a lot more to this story. Kind of similar talks to when people were talking about the idea of maybe Konami being acquired. Well, Konami has their arms in like a bajillion different things. They have like health spas.
They got pachinko machines.
Yeah. They also
got the Metal Gear Solid IP.
They have like an entire division that deals with bottled water and stuff like that. So
oh my goodness,
they do all kinds of stuff. And Square Enix, while they're not like stretched in so many different places like Konami is, they're more focused on creating franchisable properties across different types of mediums, which in a way is what Sony's trying to do, from what we've learned recently with them, doing the Uncharted TV show and, buying a company like Crunchyroll and Funimation, which handle, anime and manga distribution in North America. I think that they're trying to dip their toe into a lot of this stuff. But Garrett, I'm curious to hear from you, because I've spouted off a lot of stuff here. What do you think? What do you think Square Enix has to offer, and what do you think about the idea that it's more than just games when acquiring Square Enix?
Yeah, one of the biggest signs that I thought was Square Enix is like their business strategy. First off, was dropping their North American studios, including the Hitman studio earlier.
Hmm.
That was at IO Interactive, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so when I saw that, I'm like, okay, they really want to focus to where they kind of make the most profit. And
Mhm.
and these weren't like the places where they were getting or expectations, right? We keep seeing these targets and these hits that they wanted to hit with Avengers, what they wanted with Tomb Raider franchise, and so on and so forth. And then each and every time a business meeting pop up, it's like, well, even though it sold this like millions of copies, it didn't reach our expectations. It's like,
Yeah.
okay,
Just to
now
pull a
time to
number
just
out, Garrett, with Tomb Raider
yes.
specifically, apologies for interrupting
Hmm.
you. That
No, go
specifically
for it.
sold 6 million copies plus, and was deemed a failure commercially.
Yeah, that's more than Persona 5, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, it's more than a lot of
So
games.
just yeah, more than a lot of games. So just keeping that in focus. So it's kind of interesting where they kind of just want to drop this major piece of their business out. And so now what I'm viewing Square Enix as very Japanese focused, right? And like, of course, setting these games, translating and bringing it to the West as well. We got a lot of Square Enix games even coming up this year, right?
Mhm.
We got the Diofield Chronicle, we got Valkyrie Profile, we got Near Automata in Switch, we got next year we got Final Fantasy 7 2 Rebirth or whatever you want to call
Well, you
it,
got two
right?
Final
It's
Fantasy
Rebirth.
games as well. You've got that. You've
Yeah,
got
and Final Fantasy 16,
well, you got Crisis
right?
Core as well, and then you also
Crisis
forgot
Core later this year.
and Star
There's
Ocean
so
as well. Don't forget about
Star
Star Ocean.
Ocean. Yeah, that's another thing. See, they're popping up with all of these JRPGs,
Yeah.
and I understand they'll primarily sell great, mostly in PlayStation ecosystem, just because of the kind of the branding behind Square Enix all this time, right? They've always been doing better with PlayStation, but it's kind of interesting to see these offshoots as well. With like, let's say Octopath Traveler, that was a Switch exclusive. Now it's on Game Pass, and it's not looking like it's not coming out on Game like taking away from Game Pass anytime soon.
Mhm.
There's Dragon Quest 11 as well that's in Game Pass. So they've been experimenting a lot with the other platforms. So what I think the benefit is mainly towards Sony. And Sony having that strong IP, making it more exclusive. I personally think if Sony bought Square Enix in, they're gonna they're gonna rip the tether off of Switch. It's like you are not publishing on Switch anymore.
Or at the
This
very
is
least, they
like the
won't
last.
have like Nintendo publish a game for them like they did with Live Alive
Exactly.
just this week, right?
Right, right. So I think it's that. I think what Sony has to gain from that is not only because Square Enix being a Japanese centric focus like developer, think of the studios that PlayStation has now. It's not Japan focused.
Mhm.
It's all more Western studios. Like the Japan studio that they had was it turned into Team Asobi in 2020.
Mhm.
And so we don't have really that much Japan focused games coming out of Sony. And so if they want to make it as inclusive as possible and getting rid of the competition, Square Enix is a great addition. And I think that's why Square Enix kind of shaped them out to be like that.
Mhm.
And that's my suspicion. But of course, Square Enix like has the backup plans, right? It's not going to just be with Sony, but we're gonna try out with Xbox with some Game Pass. Of course, Switch is like a big market in their business as well. But also these like weird strategy with NFTs
Mhm.
and like their opinions with NFTs has been wish-washy. They were really forward with it. Now everyone's like speaking really against about it. Now they're pulling back a little. I think
Well.
they're just
Lest you
well, go
forget,
for it.
Garrett, there is a Square Enix NFT that's coming out at the end of the year because
Oh goodness.
there's a Final Fantasy VII figure of Cloud that's releasing later this year, and every purchase with this figure includes a Final Fantasy VII related NFT that you get at random when you
Hmm.
purchase the figure.
Yeah, so I think they're experimenting on various business strategies in order to like just get through, get by. And I think, having the security of a parent company for Square Enix, I mean, that's, yeah, as you said, the dollar signs,
Mhm.
security. That's all what Square Enix wants. It's like, if we have that, then, and we're with PlayStation, that's probably the best place to go if they want us. So yeah, I that's what I think about it, and it'd be interesting to see. I don't like I know a lot of people think this is not logical or it's not going to go through. It's like, well, it kind of is. If from Sony's benefit, they're getting the Japan focused games, and I understand there's a lot exclusive already, but now you're making it totally exclusive.
Yeah.
From Switch and Xbox
Well, and the
and
other
PC.
factor
Yep.
that, most people don't think about is the fact that in order for those games to be exclusive to Sony consoles, Sony has to pay them for that. So
Yeah.
it's not like they're getting, Final Fantasy 16 exclusive on PlayStation 5 because for free, like for no money
Right.
being thrown at them. So I think that they especially with how much they might have thrown at them, maybe all that stuff adds up for Sony. But I think
Mhm.
like also too the idea that Sony as a company wants to put more of their franchises in different things, like having, the anime arm of Square Enix, for example, could also help them, put out, a Horizon anime or a Bloodborne manga or,
That'd be
all
cool.
kinds of different things that, maybe they might have to have, paid another company to do before. But they don't need to
Mhm.
do that now that they own, a publishing house that creates all of that content for them as well. So I look at it at the same notion of, it's like Sony would be acquiring, or whatever company acquires Square Enix. They're not just acquiring a game company; they're acquiring a multimedia company that can do films. Even though Square
Mhm.
Enix currently isn't doing a lot of films, they've done films. They also they also produce, animated content, comic book content, as well as, games themselves on top of that. So they're this big like multimedia conglomerate that isn't as expensive as buying, a WB or something like that, like
Right.
another movie studio or something like that. So I think that's the game here. But I also, you know, it's one of those things where even though, it makes a lot of sense for maybe Sony to buy them. They're not the big company, the only big company out there that could potentially acquire them. It's more
Yeah.
likely, of course, that they're acquired by, a Japanese company simply because of the way
Good.
the legal laws of acquiring companies in Japan itself works. It's so much easier for a Japanese company to buy another Japanese company, but that doesn't mean a Western
Mhm.
company couldn't come in there and offer a deal. And we'll offer some scenarios a little bit later with some of those other companies, or even a company like Tencent could come in there and buy,
That could
Square
very
Enix,
well happen.
or
Yeah.
Google or Amazon or Apple. Like any number of companies could come in there. And again, we'll talk about those
Mhm.
more in a little bit. So it's time to play What If, Garrett, because we're gonna look into our
What
crystal
if?
ball a little bit. We're gonna use our perception skill, because I'm wearing my Calgary Flames hat of perception, so I get +2
Oh,
to
okay.
future sight skills. So I'm gonna look into my crystal ball, and we're gonna see what would potentially happen if Square Enix was purchased by Sony, as an example. Because I think all the companies and scenarios we're going to talk about tonight, I think that's probably the most likely scenario if a
Mhm.
purchase is actually going to happen at all. So first of all, what would this mean for the company? And to kind of circle back to Kevin's question, because he had specifically asked, do we think the games would remain, exclusive or multi-platform? First of all, I actually looked at the deal that Sony made with Bungie when they purchased them
Mhm.
as a sign that maybe they don't actually make all these franchises, first party
Exclusive.
franchises that are exclusive. They might do that with some stuff, but I don't think they do that
Mhm.
with everything. Or even in the
Yeah.
same way that, Microsoft is going to be doing with Activision and Blizzard when that deal finalizes, later this year or early next year. I think I look at it more like that's actually the scenario that I anticipate the most likely, especially because I think Sony's also starting to expand their horizons a little bit as to where they're publishing their games. I mean, they're starting to publish a lot more stuff on PC now, and as well just while they're kind of forced into it by the MLB, the fact that they even continued to develop MLB The Show for, Switch or Xbox, like, just goes to show, because otherwise, if they really didn't want that game to be on other platforms, they'd probably just walk from MLB The Show, and then maybe make their own baseball game that's unlicensed rather than make MLB The Show a thing instead. So I think that's more likely the situation that would be looking at rather than everything be exclusive. But I think you'd see like I think like the big Square-Enix franchises would be exclusive to PlayStation, which is kind of what we see now anyways, for the most part. But what do you think, Garrett? Am I off base with this?
No, I kind of agree with you. It would be more like, I wouldn't say exactly like Bungie, but it would be a little bit loose compared to the other studios. I think Sony is understanding when they acquire a studio, it's like keep them close to the studio, make it exclusive, first party family, or be like Bungie or like the other new studios that they acquired and be a little loose. I think Bungie is a special case just because of Destiny being a live service game, and that's their sole game. And of course, they're going to support the other live service type of games that Sony plans to kind of roll out in the next few years. For Square Enix, though, we got a lot of single player stuff, and there was a lot of live service stuff that they tried out, right? They got Babylon's Fall, and then they had the Avengers, which it was Babylon's Fall, they saw the writing on the wall. It was like a dumpster fire. So, I mean, like,
they're still supporting it, though. There's season pass content for Babylon's Fall coming out for the next, like, 6 months or something still. Because they already announced it, and people already paid for it. So I guess they're just doing it. But I don't know, because this would fall into that category as well. But, I mean, I would consider Final Fantasy XIV a live service game. And that's one of the biggest live service games around right now.
Okay, I agree with you. Yeah, Final Fantasy XIV is a huge one, and they're raking in a lot of profit from that game, for sure. But all the single-player games, I would agree with you. Like, a lot of the bigger first-party, of course, Final Fantasy would be exclusive to PlayStation. I would think the Octopath Traveler Triangle Strategy studio would not publish or go with Nintendo Switch anymore. It would be more, I would say, either exclusive. I would say most of them, all these studios, are going to be PlayStation and PC. And yeah, there was a lot of like back and forth. It was like, well, what about the Pixel remaster? It's like, guys, Sony doesn't care if it's on Steam. It's on Steam. Like, they're putting their first party games out on Steam as well to get them more profit. So I think they're understanding to be a little bit more open than just their platform themselves. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking. But on the other hand, what I also think is that, Sony has a lot of old, JRPG IP that they're not even touching, like Legend of Dragoon, Dark Cloud, you got Wild Arms. And it's like, they're looking at these remakes, Live Alive. They're looking at Triangle Strategy Art. They're looking at all these things. It's like, we want that. We want that for our IP. That would be so cool. And so that would be another, back and forth with Sony and Square Enix. That would be cool to see if Square Enix was pulled in to the Sony family. The one thing that really doubt this would ever happen is the whole direction of PlayStation itself, right? They've kind of been more upfront about being more live service than ever, more Western focused than ever before. And so that's kind of my reservations with this deal ever going through is just Sony's future, especially being outside of Japan a lot. Maybe Square Enix could just hold the fort down of all their IP and stuff. So
maybe.
I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think as far as Square Enix's games that they currently have on their slate, I think they are definitely pushing in the more Western focused direction too. If you look at a game like Final Fantasy 16 or a game like Forspoken, like they're very much, designed for Western audiences in mind first. With the, Japan is kind of secondary with some of that stuff. Whereas, a lot of the stuff they're doing for Nintendo with Live Alive and Triangle Strategy and stuff like that, like that's more Japan focused. And if it sells in North America, great. So I think, yeah, there would be a shift in, how they would develop a lot of this stuff. And
Mhm.
yeah, they might just be that Sony kind of forces them to maybe, buckle down on more live servicey stuff, or maybe the idea is that maybe this is a way for Sony to have a company that not only develops bigger stuff but also smaller projects as well, because we
Mhm.
do see Sony dabble with that, or a lot of times they'll work with indie studios to bring smaller experiences. But if they had a company with a studio like Team Asano as part of their development pipeline, developing smaller games, or stuff like some another subsidiary of Square Enix with Tokyo RPG Factory kind of
You're
fits
right.
this bill as well. Like they do have some of that smaller stuff that I think they would probably still let them develop and go from there. But also I find it
Mhm.
interesting too that they would try and find a way to have Team Asano do PlayStation only stuff when they've only ever made games for Nintendo Switch and PC at this point, or I guess
That would be
Xbox
interesting.
with Octopath Traveler. But they've never actually developed a game for PlayStation yet, so it would be
That's
interesting
true.
to kind of force them to do that. But yeah, that's why, like, the more we talk it out, I feel like it's a deal that even though I think Sony gets a lot out of it, it doesn't. You're definitely right. It doesn't necessarily jive with the direction that Sony's going in, where Sony's trying to become more of a live service
Mhm.
company and less of a single player focused company. Whereas Square Enix is still very much like they're in the live service stuff and they're in the NFT stuff, but they're also very much, they know where their bread and butter is with a lot of the single player stuff too, and they know if they
Mhm.
move too far from it, then it's going to be a tougher sell for people with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
But there you go. So ultimately, I think that we answered the question as far as would franchises remain exclusive. I think ultimately it would be on a case by case basis. I think so.
Yeah.
And also to your point, Garrett, I think I salivated a little bit when you started talking about the idea of getting like a Wild Arms game, or
Yeah.
a Legend of Dragoon made by Square Enix. Like, I think that would be amazing. Probably would never happen, obviously, even if the acquisition happened. But man, that would be awesome. I would so dig that. But I'm gonna go to Gingy37 in the chat, who says it may make more sense for Microsoft to buy a Square. It would give them more access to the Japanese market. And this is how I wanted to use a seamless transition,
Mm.
Garrett, to talk about, maybe other companies swooping in here and buying Square Enix. And Microsoft is definitely one that I know Sean and I have talked about on the Xbox Drive before. The idea of
Mhm.
like, well, we've had the question before on the show. Well, if it, like, after Activision Blizzard, who's next? Like, what studio should Microsoft
Yeah.
go over next? And I always am in the boat of Square Enix, even though I know, again, with the logistics of things, it's a little bit tougher for them to just go in and buy Square Enix, because of the way the Japanese law works. But at the same time, I actually think it would be a bigger fit, to Jinji's point, than Sony, not just because of the franchises that are exclusive to PlayStation currently, also be eventually be able to be coming to Xbox, but to Jinji's point of giving them a leg up in the Japanese market, because they really do need a Japanese studio, and I'm talking about more than just Tango Gameworks, because they do have a Japanese game
Mhm.
studio right currently, but I think they need to expand that a little bit more, and find a studio that's not just based in Japan making games for North America, but one that is making games that Japanese gamers care about, or
Mhm.
or likewise that appealing to the audience in North America that likes Japanese games and buys every single one of them to appeal to that Persona player, or that Final Fantasy player.
Mhm.
Like, I think that's the line that where they go for it. And I think a lot of these games would make perfect Game Pass games too. But you don't need me to tell you that, because Garrett, what do you think about the idea of maybe Microsoft buying Square Enix? What do you think about that?
Hmm. That's a. I think that's a tough sell.
Mm-hmm.
I understand, Phil Spencer wanting to get into the Japanese market. He was very excited for the Persona announcement that happened at their conference, and I agree with you. It's a big get, especially for them. It feels like it's catching up to Sony in the Japan market, but that also makes sense too, because Sony, is they're Japanese and there's a Western based market and company. Square Enix would definitely give them a leg up in the Japanese market, no doubt. But I don't think Microsoft, they've been very careful about what to invest as well. I think Activision was a good call just because of the deal that they had. I think they just had the best deal that they would ever gotten from them. And it's like, that's Call of Duty. Like,
Yeah.
let's go for it. There's some bad juju going around with Activision. It's like, it's Call of Duty. Like this is
Let alone
this is
everything
like
else, like World of
now or
Warcraft
never,
or Diablo or
right,
anything else that
all the
Activision
other
owns
IP
at that point. Yeah.
for sure. And so, but with Square Enix, like, okay, we get Final Fantasy. It's like, do our fans like that? It's like, well, I mean, kind of like maybe a very small portion, It's like, I don't know how many players are going to be grabbing onto Game Pass because of a Square Enix game.
Right.
And so I just don't think Microsoft would ever go for something as big as Square Enix. I would imagine a smaller Japanese company would do just fine. I even think of Sega. I think a lot of people talked about Sega ad nauseum with the acquisition from Microsoft. I would think that would fit a little bit better than the Square Enix, because Square Enix has that identity brand with other consoles than Microsoft, whereas Sega, I mean, it does have some IP that's associating with PlayStation. I think of Yakuza for a second, but now it's like kind of more transitioning to a very multi-platform. It's PlayStation, but now it's Xbox with Game Pass. I just, and then now with Persona, it's like, I mean, a lot of the games coming from Sega now is going to Xbox and their Game Pass, and that's awesome. But with Square Enix, there's just a lot of IP that's exclusive to Nintendo, exclusive to Sony now. I just don't know if, like, okay, Microsoft snatched up Square Enix. Now what happens? Well, we got an exclusive PlayStation game, so like we got Final Fantasy, 16 or whatever. It's like, okay, is Final Fantasy 17 gonna be multi-platform? Is it gonna be exclusive to Xbox? It's just like, I don't know. It just doesn't make logically sense to me what's the direction of their games now they're in a Microsoft studio. And of course, Microsoft has always been, let them be, do what they want to do. So I think they would be more multi-platform than exclusive.
Yeah, that's what I think would happen is they
case,
they wouldn't be exclusive with Microsoft at all. Like the benefit would be, hey, by the way, you could pay $70 to get this on PlayStation, or you could just get it in Game Pass day one. Like I think that would be the play there more than anything. And we've seen, even though the console numbers aren't huge in Japan, we've been seeing those Xbox numbers really creeping up in Japan, especially because the console is readily available. Unlike the PlayStation 5, it's still not even available very well at this point. Like a lot of people are seemingly picking up the Series S, so I think there's a lot more Japanese support for this stuff. But I think it's more of like the tipping scale thing where. If they were to acquire franchises and have them on PlayStation and have enough benefit to Japanese customers on Game Pass, then I think it would just bring more people into the Game Pass ecosystem, which is just what their goal is at the end of the day. But I agree with you with Sega, because I think, to your point, I actually think that's a better fit than Square Enix too, because Sega has just got a lot of IPs that they're currently sitting on. That would be amazing to see join the Xbox brand, and not only that, but we've just seen Sega and Microsoft just have a really good relationship recently, especially with Soul Hackers 2 coming out later this month, launching day and date on Xbox. I'm so excited to play that there. Like that's gonna be great. Like Atlas's first game on Xbox since Catherine on the 360. Like I'm so
oh my
excited to play that on
goodness.
Xbox. So yeah, I think like I think Sega definitely makes more sense than Square Enix as a target for Microsoft, which is why I also agree. I think they're not very likely to acquire them. In fact, I actually, if you were to ask me, because I think this is the portion of the show where we get to like, what do we think the future actually looks like for Square Enix, and who actually buys Square Enix if they get bought at all? And I think the most likely company in my books to buy Square Enix at this point is actually Tencent, or at least investing in a majority stake in Square Enix as opposed to just buying them outright. That way it gives them
Hmm.
the financial security to do what they want. And Tencent's kind of like Microsoft, where they buy all these companies and then they're very hands off from that point. They just kind of let them do their thing. Yes, I know that's not exactly the scenario that a lot of people probably want to hear because, some people don't love the idea of a Chinese company coming in and buying up all these studios. But at the same time, I think that it's the most likely scenario because the other scenario would maybe be a company like Embracer Group coming in and buying them. But if Embracer Group was going to do that, they would have bought them instead of just buying just the North American part of Square-Enix first and then leaving the rest of it alone. So otherwise, normally I maybe would have argued that maybe Embracer Group actually makes a play at Square-Enix. Whereas I think like the most worrying, solution would be if, Google or Amazon came in here and bought Square-Enix. Then all those games would be exclusive to Amazon Luna or Google Stadia, and then we'd be sad because then we'd have to play them there instead of anywhere
I don't
else.
think Google is gonna go for a game studio. I think they learned their lessons. Like, all right, this is a little too much money for us to invest in, and we're not committed. So that's good. Amazon, I feel like they're kind of just floating, but I honestly, it could be. I mean, Apple. I don't know. Like, I don't know what's Apple's direction in terms of gaming. Like, maybe they're looking at it as like, oh, that's kind of cool, but I don't see them fitting in with Square Enix. But I agree with you. A Tencent related or other bigger, just like multi conglomerate company that's all around the world could fund Square Enix and just be fine. But yeah, I just think Square Enix is just gonna just find different ways to get more money. I think they're just trying to figure out, other than their Final Fantasy IP and Final Fantasy 14, is like, what else can we do to be sustainable? And I think a lot of these game companies are trying to do too. You could see that from Ubisoft too. Like, all right, let's pull out game X, Y, and Z, and let's figure out all these live servicey experiments, and let's hit a whale, let's hit a gold mine, in this gaming industry because yeah, we're behind. And it's just like Square Enix is kind of feeling that too. Not as much,
Mm-hmm.
of course, with Final Fantasy still being really strong and of course doing I applaud them for doing their smaller projects still,
Yeah.
with with Octopath Traveler and Triangle Strategy, and then those Oninaki and those games. I applaud them for doing those smaller projects as well, faster ones. But I don't know. I don't know if they'll be bought or not. I don't know what their financials are looking like. They're just, every time I see them, they're like, "Well, that didn't hit our expectations." I'm like, "Okay, then what's the next step?" Being under a secure blanket like another company, it's kind of the times right now, just because of the inflation rates and the economy going on right now. I think it would just make sense going to another company. So could be Tencent, could be Sony.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we'll see how it goes.
So then we've come to the part of the show, Garrett, where even though you said you have no idea what will happen, I'm going to force you to tell me what you think is going to
Okay.
happen. Because this is the part of the show where we actually guess. What do you think happens to Square Enix? Do we think that they don't get sold at all? Do we think that they remain independent? Do you think, a company comes in and buys them? And if so, which one? What do you think is going to happen? And give you some time to think, Garrett. I'll once again reiterate that my current hunch is that they will be purchased by someone in the next 2 years, and it'll be Tencent. That's my prediction. I think
Oh,
that,
okay.
or at least Tencent will make they won't necessarily purchase them outright, but my idea is that Tencent comes in, kind of like they've done with Epic or a bunch of other companies, and they're just like, here's a whole bunch of money. We're buying like 30% of you, and then you can
Yeah.
remain independent from there. Like, I think that's the scenario that I'm envisioning for Square Enix, especially because they are like trying to toy with a lot of these different ideas, which I think is appealing to a company like Tencent, as far as, not necessarily NFTs, but, doing different varied types of games, like live servicey games, but even smaller projects and stuff like that. Because we've seen Tencent fund a lot of companies that do that type of mix of projects where they're not just working on live service only games or just Western games. They like to have companies that do a bit of a mix. So that's kind of my prediction here. I'm also going to go to Genji's 37's prediction in the chat, who says Konami buy Square-Enix and invest heavily in pachinko machines.
Oh no.
That's a good
Oh
one.
no.
We got to get a Final Fantasy pachinko machine or a Dragon Quest one. You know, you throw your coin in and then you got to battle that metal slime. Oh man, so good. But
that, I mean, I could totally see it. But
also, I love Yarden's idea in the chat too, which is like, I think Square and Sega would be a perfect match for each other. Persona and Final Fantasy all under one roof if they just merged. So, I mean, that's kind of what happened that's what happened with Enix and Square back in the day, like Squaresoft.
That's true.
Because Enix was the Dragon Quest company, and then they had some other IPs beyond that, and then Squaresoft had Final Fantasy and their IPs, and then they just merged together to make one, super RPG house. But maybe that idea is there again. But Garrett, now that I've given you some time to think, what do you think?
SquareEnix Sega, let's go. But yeah, I'm more towards an agreement with you. It's more going to be an investment.
Yeah.
Either from Tencent, even from that Saudi fund as well. Has been
the one that's buying SNK, right?
Owns SNK Studio, like that studio, but also has a good percentage now of, not percentage, but a good profit share of Nintendo. They bought a big chunk over there. And they've been really advancing their future in terms of gaming around the world. So I can easily see either those two companies going in and just making an investment to Square Enix to keep them independent for now. But if I really want something to have, like if they're not going to make it on their own, which company would I like them to go with? Logically to me would be Sony. And that's just me. It's just like that kind of makes sense. I know how people out there is like, oh, that would really suck. It would make all things like exclusive, whatnot. It's like, well, logically it would be like beneficial to both companies, not probably to like the Nintendo consumer or whatever, but for them, it would be really beneficial, I would think, business wise. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Square Enix is gonna be still independent, still multi-platform. It's still gonna make the deals with Sony. They're really, leaning on the most important franchise Square Enix has, making it exclusive and keeping it exclusive. I think that's the big thing. Of course, going to PC, but keeping away from Microsoft's hands for like, at least even Final Fantasy 14. They promised Final Fantasy 14 on Xbox, right? And it's still not here? Or is it the Xbox One version?
Development issues that kind of prevent them from doing that. It's not even an exclusive.
I see.
Because Yoshi P, the director of Final Fantasy 14, has come out and talked about that, where they had announced like, hey, by the way, we have it in development. We're trying to make this a thing. But it's something to do with the way the servers work as to why they couldn't actually have it.
Oh, okay. So it's more of a technical.
Yeah, it's more of a technical problem. It's not that they don't want it to, because the idea with Final Fantasy 14 is they can't just have it be siloed on different consoles. They have to all be connected together, and they just can't configure it currently with the way their servers work for the game across the two platforms it's on right now, for whatever reason.
I think the games that I just listed off earlier in the episode that's coming over the next year going to really determine where Square Enix is going to be at financially.
Yeah.
After this big just load of games that they're releasing this holiday and the two heavy hitters next year, it will be interesting to see where they're at after all of that.
Yeah, and that's just assuming that Square Enix doesn't announce anything for next year between now and then too.
That's true.
You better believe there's probably we have that Tactics Ogre thing. That's, for example, that's
that's true.
Leaked a bajillion times, and it was even on the PlayStation Store for a little bit too, with a release date for later this year. So.
I find they could be I'm sure they're successful too. It just looks like they are shaping up to be acquired in some way, just because of the shaving off of studios and everything. But you see Capcom being like the most successful as they ever been. It's really because of their Monster Hunter franchise and Resident Evil being really strong as well. I think Square Enix can really bounce back too by just maybe they just really want to focus on their studios in Japan. And it's like, okay, let's make them the best we can be here. And let's not worry about the, like, I'm sure they have their own place, but let's not worry about the Western market, like the North American studios and their IP over there and just let it go. So I think that's most likely the idea, what happened there.
Yeah, like it's always really felt like ever since, Eidos was acquired by Square Enix, it always felt like those games and those studios were kind of on the back burner for them. Like they just, there wasn't as much, care put into, maintaining them, at least, from the perception of the consumer, not necessarily, on the back end. Who knows how that actually went down. But so I either way, I'm interested to know what happens with Square Enix. I love their games, so I'm curious to know,
Me too.
Where they kind of end up. But I'm not worried about them or anything like that. Like I'm not worried about them in the same way that we were worried for the longest time about THQ before THQ went out of business and had to sell all their properties. I remember just following that story as it was going on, because that was when I was really getting into podcasts for the first time, and I thought that was like super interesting to hear about what was going on with THQ at the time. So yeah, I don't think we're at that point with Square Enix or anything like that. And I think they'll be fine regardless of what happens, and people will be able to still play their games. So that's the kind of the main takeaway from this. Well, we got a lot of write-ins about Sony specifically purchasing Square Enix, and I kind of alluded to it at the top of the show where, I know people were kind of divisive on this topic a little bit, but let's bring in some of the community members because I want to hear what they have to say. Let's start with the good sir, who says, not a question this week, but I just gotta say that if Sony buys Square Enix, it'll officially kill my dream of getting another Super Mario RPG, and that makes me really sad. Hashtag Justice for Gino. I'm sorry to say this, good sir, and I'm going to be the one to say this. But
oh no,
that's never happening yet, whether or not they're acquired by Sony or not. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, like if they do another Mario RPG, it'll just be another Mario and Luigi game instead of a Super Mario RPG with
I mean, Mario and Luigi, the franchise or whatever, the Mario and Luigi whatever, that's been the Mario RPG spiritual successor, I would say, for like the past few games that they've done. So I can imagine another one of those on Switch.
They've been inching closer back to that model with something like Paper Mario with Thousand Year Door, the newest one, Origami King.
King, yeah.
So I think there's even a possibility that goes back closer to that RPG style, but still being very casual, just like Paper Mario is. But yeah, I just think that the ship has sailed on that one. Like I think if there was ever a chance they were gonna do it, we would have probably gotten it by now, or we would have gotten it in that instead of having Triangle Strategy or Live Alive come out. I think we would have gotten that instead. But I'm sorry, but I think it's probably over for that. But next up, Awesome Dave 1337 says, if Sony buys Square Enix, does this mean we'll finally get the Pixel remasters on consoles? God, I hope so. I mean, I've been waiting for those forever, and I'm like, I keep seeing them on Steam, and I'm like, I'm this close, Garrett, to just pulling the trigger and just buying them. But I know the second I do, they'll get announced for consoles, and I'll be sad because I just would rather play them there. So,
if I had a Steam Deck, I would probably buy the Pixel remasters.
Yeah, probably. Whereas, I don't want to sit at my computer and play those games. I'd rather just, especially because I just don't like to play on my laptop anyways, as it is. So, I hope that they come to consoles. And I would imagine we hear about that. Maybe that's a 2023 thing at this point, Garrett. Just throw another thing on the 2023 pile.
That's true.
Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. And then, of course, don't forget Dragon Quest 3 HD remastered. Let's go.
Yeah, that's still coming.
That's still coming next year. So I'm very excited about that too. Next up, we got Skycatcher Gaming, who says, I think Sony would buy Square Enix if they bought another company I think Square would buy Square Enix if they thought another company would try to buy them first. Rumor is that Sony wants only one specific studio at Square Enix, and that's it. Maybe for the rights for the back catalog for PlayStation Plus Premium. Yeah, but I mean, again, with rumors, it's just so hard to believe a lot of that stuff. But you're right, like that's something we saw with Nintendo with Next Level Games, where it sounded like, maybe another company tried to come in and acquire them, and Nintendo said, no, we'll just buy you instead. And after the success of Luigi's Mansion. So maybe that is the kind of the play there, where maybe they don't swoop in until it sounds like they catch wind of another company trying to acquire them. I think it's maybe.
I just think Nintendo and Microsoft are not the studios that are not gonna buy SquareEnix. It doesn't really feel like it's like their way to invest. Yeah, definitely not Nintendo. And Microsoft, I just don't see it. So I think it's fine. I think they're fine.
Next up, we got Buck at Bucklepuff on Twitter, who says, my biggest fear is console exclusivity. Many of their games I love, like Bravely Default and Triangle Strategy, are games that I prefer to play handheld. Yeah, as we talked about earlier, I still think, like, regardless of what company buys them, unless that company's name is Google or Amazon, those games will still continue to probably, like, there will probably be games that are still multi-platform for Square Enix. That's still what I anticipate. So I wouldn't worry.
I think that'd be a cool little side project for them. It's just like for Sony themselves, like, okay, we got this company that has experience multi-platform for a while now, and with Japan IP, let's see how this operation goes. Let's see how the sales go with these smaller projects that go to Switch. I would think, the next Triangle Strategy game or whatever coming from that studio, it's going to be multi-platform. It's going to be on PlayStation as well at that point. But yeah, I think it could possibly be on Switch. I don't know about Xbox, but
no, I think that we shut the door on something like Xbox, but I think Switch is not out of the question with some of this stuff, or even PC, especially because of if games that are being developed at Square Enix under Sony are popular in Japanese markets, why would you not release them on Switch if you're going to release them on PC as well? Because of how popular the Switch is in that country, right? It just makes sense. But next up, we got Yarden at Yarden Angel, who says, these are my terms before Sony buys Square Enix. So he's got a list of demands here. So number 1, release the Pixel remasters on Switch right meow. And then number 2 is make the inevitable HD 2D versions of Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger multi-platform.
Oh man.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I'm still questioning whether or not we ever get Chrono Trigger as an HD 2D game. I actually think it's more likely we get Final Fantasy VI instead, because of the rights issues with Chrono Trigger, which is part of the reason we've heard from people who in the know as to why that game hasn't been released, like been re-released, because of a bunch of legal issues between, a bunch of the different creators on the game. But yeah, we talked about Pixel's remasters already. Like, the fact that they're not even out on other platforms just boggles my mind at this point.
Do you remember that announcement? Like, we were so excited. We were very excited for this. And they just decided to put it on PC and mobile with just no hesitation. And I'm just like, what are you doing? I know you're holding your cards, Square.
Yeah.
I think that's like let's break a glass and push a button, emergency use only situation. But man, they need to. If those were on Switch, I think a lot of people will gobble it up. And of course, PlayStation too. I would love to have it on PlayStation because of the trophy support with those games.
Yeah, and I mean, those games have all been on PlayStation before, with the PlayStation 1 re-releases of all those games, whether it's, Final Fantasy Origin or Final Fantasy Chronicles or Final Fantasy Anthology. Like, they've all been on PlayStation consoles before, so it wouldn't be the first time or be weird, because that was the thing about the PlayStation 1 was it had re-released versions or versions of every single Final Fantasy game that had ever been released to that point. Whether it was Tactics or 1 through 9, like, they were all playable on PlayStation 1. And plus, there's even that PlayStation 1 version of Chrono Trigger, just because. So there you go.
Oof.
Yeah. And then the last point about this topic before we get to our non-Square Enix related question of the week comes to us from Stealth at Stealth40K on Twitter, who says, it would be absolutely terrible and not a good thing for Square Enix fans. Question answered. I personally don't think this is happening. I mean, as we talked about it, I don't. At first, if I would have thought about the idea of Sony purchasing Square Enix, I might have been in the same camp as Stealth here, where I think It might have been bad for games in a way, or bad for gamers, because it would, cause these games to be locked in one platform. Because of the way I've seen Sony handle the deal with Bungie, as well as their shift to PC, I really don't think, as we've talked about, I really don't think it would be so bad, because I think a lot of the games that would be multi-platform anyways would continue to be multi-platform. In which case you're just getting what you're getting already now from Square-Enix. So what's the difference?
Yeah.
Like that's
you're
kind
getting
of the way I look at it.
You're getting Final Fantasy exclusive for the longest time, and then eventually get released on PC as what they do with their other first-party studio. It's the exact same thing. So, yeah, Square Enix being purchased by Sony, I don't think there's like, all right, now all your smaller projects, they're going to be on Sony, because it's going to be it's going to enhance the Sony platform. I don't think the bosses over at Sony is going to be like, this small project is going to make us millions of dollars and
Tactics
tons of money
Ogre
off of
being
it.
exclusive to PlayStation instead of on Switch is just going to suddenly make that game so much more popular and make us so much more money.
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of those smaller projects that still come out from, Square Enix, I'm even more confident than ever now saying this. I think they would all still be multi-platform for that reason.
Yeah.
Especially the ones, again, that are targeted at Japanese audience. Like, why would you keep them exclusive then at that point? It just doesn't make any sense. But
Exactly. You just won't see any Square Enix games on Game Pass anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like I we'll finally get that PlayStation version of Octopath Traveler, Garret. I think that's the bottom line there. It won't just remain on Xbox, Switch, and PC only, because that's a weird one to me. I still can't believe.
So weird, isn't it?
I still can't believe that game's never come out on PlayStation. But
Do you think it'll be Triangle Strategy is going to be on Game Pass? Do you think that's going to happen eventually?
we keep hearing that Bravely Default's going to come to Game Pass at some point too. So I'm like,
Yeah, Bravely Default 2
Yeah,
would be that would be kind of nuts.
that would also be weird too. Like,
Yeah.
equally as weird as Octopath Traveler. But yeah,
It's like a sequel to a 3DS game on Xbox.
like even all those
No.
HD2D games, like anything. Well, actually, I think like because Octopath Traveler was also published by Nintendo, so I don't even think it's a published by Nintendo thing.
Right.
I think they're all timed exclusives at this point. Like I think like Live Alive comes to other platforms at some point, like PC at 1st, and then other platforms later. And I still think Triangle Strategy is going to come to other platforms too at some point. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Triangle Strategy is so good.
It's so good. You gotta play it. But then last question of this week, and this is not related to our main topic at all, to kind of round out the show this week, comes to us from Nagachaka on the Discord, who also, believe it or not, asked the exact same question to the Nintendo Drive this week. Interesting enough. So if you want the other perspective, you can go listen to the Nintendo Drive tomorrow with Sean and Kato. But he asked the question, when are we getting a Nintendo Drive and RPG crossover episode for a special 3-hour episode all about Xenoblade Chronicles 3? After all, this is an RPG dynasty and a Nintendo savior after Mario Strikers. So Garret, when are we doing this crossover episode with Sean and Kato about Xenoblade Chronicles 3? When's this happening?
I don't know. Whenever I finish the dang game, is probably going to be in October more than anything.
Yeah.
Seeing reviews is going to be about 100 to 150 hours of gameplay. And from what I played, I love the game. And I think I'll play a lot of the side quest stuff. So I think I'm going to be in it for the long haul for this one. But I'm sure Kato is super excited for it.
Oh, of course.
And I'm ready to geek out with her for 3 hours. I'm sure she would be thrilled.
She would be very thrilled to join us on an episode of the RPG game for 3 hours about Xenoblade Chronicles. I mean, actually, you never know, because first of all, I haven't even heard from Kato whether or not she's playing Xenoblade. I guess we'll find out tomorrow morning on the Nintendo Drive. Maybe she's been secretly playing it. We just don't know about it. Whereas I know Sean's playing it as well, and I know he's also early. I just don't have my copy yet. It's still coming in the mail because it shipped from BC.
Right.
I'm in Ontario, and it'll eventually be here on Thursday. So on Thursday, I'll be able to play it. I did finish live though. So I do have an
Oh,
opening.
nice! Congrats.
Although I'm going to talk about this on the Xbox Drive this week, Garrett, but I'm like secretly hooked on
Yeah.
The Sims 4 and I can't stop playing it. It's bad.
Oh my
It's real
goodness.
bad.
Sims
I
4.
can't stop. I need to
One
know
of those, like, game
what's
nature.
going on with my non-binary vampire who's like a very prominent singer who lives in this very fancy apartment and she's got like 8 kids. So that's just who I am now. Garrett.
You can geek out with Kato about that. I'm sure she would love that.
She'll understand. I know Kate will understand my obsession with The Sims 4. But anyways, I think that's going to wrap up tonight's show. But before we go, Garrett, plugs go.
You can find me on Twitter. You can follow me at Blind Explosion. You can also find me on the Nintendo Shack, part of the Play Some Video Games Podcast Network. We're live every Thursday nights over at twitch.tv/PSVG. And we release on all podcast services, Google, Apple, all the things. So go check us out over there. I think this week is going to be Friday, so
Nice.
check out. Just we'll go live Friday probably. So,
Sweet.
anyways.
But yeah, more Xenoblade talk promised for Friday. So go, if you want to hear Garrett's thoughts about Xenoblade before we get to the 3-hour episode about Xenoblade, go listen to Nintendo Shack on Friday. Go join them over there. They have a good show. As for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. I don't really tweet much these days because I've taken kind of a bit of a social media hiatus a bit, but I'm on there if you want to go check me out there. You can also find us on Twitter at Carpool Gaming if you want to go follow Courtland Lawn and go talk to him there. He's over there as well. Also, you can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/carpoolgaming and on Patreon at patreon.com/carpoolgaming on podcast services around the globe. So for Garrett Bland, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been the 58th level of the RPG Cave, and we're out.
Bye.